It's been a while, but I'm alive, kicking, and working on really hard, worn out looking pieces of furniture. Hello, everyone. Welcome or welcome back. This is an antique piece of furniture I found off Facebook Marketplace. You can see that at one point it was beautiful, but this top is absolutely gone. The finish is failing and flaking off everywhere. There are chunks and chips missed out of this. This has so much wear and tear on it, but it still has good bones. I'm going to see what I can do to make this look beautiful again. As I inspect this thing, the damage and wear and tear just does not stop. The inside of these drawers are disgusting. Typically, I start my furniture flips by removing the hardware and giving it a good scrub down, but there is so much old yuckness on this dresser that needs to come off. It can't stay on it. So I'm not going to clean things, I'm just going to pull off anyways. So I start right away with removing all the broken, damaged, and nasty pieces on the top of this dresser. I start with a screwdriver and then eventually switch to a putty knife, and I'm just prying off all the areas that are loose that I can get with those tools first. Now I will admit that removing old veneer does take a while, and this took quite some time. But you can see that the sun is shining, the rooster is crowing in the background, so I just enjoyed some time outside and worked on this top. Now, after prying everything off that I could with my hands, you could see that there's a few spots here that just aren't going to come off. They are glued on too well. So I use a damp cloth, let it soak, and I get that wood wet, and then I take some 80 grit sandpaper on my orbital sander and I sand those off. Now, normally I don't sand wet wood because it shreds it, but I'm wanting this to be removed, and it is solid wood underneath these pieces, so I'm not worried about sanding too much. After a few minutes of sanding, I was able to get all that old veneer off, and we have a nice clean top. Next, I went to removing the hardware. These handles are nice, but some of them are missing, so I have to do something else on the handles. Now, the bottom drawer has this wooden design on the front, which this may irritate some people, but I did go ahead and remove that with a flathead screwdriver and a hammer, just because it doesn't work with the final look that I want to do on this piece. The next step in the removal process is to remove all this old flaking finish. Now, whenever I come across people who don't like painted furniture, their main complaint is that it scratches, chips, flakes, it doesn't last forever. And this piece right here is just proof that wood finished pieces of furniture don't last forever either. Nothing in life is ever going to last forever. But if I can take a very damaged antique that was probably going to end up in the dump and fix it up, give it a new coat of paint to make it look fresh and pretty so it lasts another 10 years, I consider that a job well done. The top of this dresser was a big issue, but the next big issue is one of the legs is broken, so it is super wobbly. I will have to fix that. So I took a look at the legs and marked off where I need a cut on the legs to remove basically the damage so this thing can set flush and even again. And I measured and then I marked all 4 legs with that same distance. And then I used my mini chainsaw to cut those off. Now, if you are a DIY lady and you don't have a mini chainsaw, you definitely need one of these. They are so easy to use and way less scary than using a full-sized chainsaw. This one cut very easily through all 4 legs, and I will definitely try to get a link for the product in the description for you. All right, everything that isn't staying on this dresser is finally off and removed, so it is time to give this old girl a nice good scrub down. I'm just using some sudsy Dawn just soap water and a clean towel just to give this thing a good scrub, and I'm scrubbing the inside and the outside of everything. And it did take me a couple wash downs because this thing was absolutely filthy. Now the only veneer left on this piece is the side panels and the front of the drawers. So when it came to rinsing off that sudsy water, I did go ahead and use my water hose to rinse all that dirt and sudsy water off. And that's just because this piece is mainly solid wood now. Now the veneer area parts, I did have a towel handy, so I wiped those off as soon as I was done rinsing them out, so water isn't just sitting there causing that veneer to bubble. And then I let everything sit out in the sun to thoroughly dry. There is this one corner that is completely chipped off, plus this is an oldie but goodie, so there is wear and tear and dings and nicks all over this. Now I do leave some of those because I want to keep some of the character in this piece, but for the big gouges, I do mix up some Bondo and repair and fill those areas. Now, normally I use the wood filler Bondo, but I moved out way out in the country. There's not a store close by that has that. There is a Walmart in the next town over though, and they carry regular like car Bondo, so I did use that on this piece. I also added Bondo to the bottom of the legs and then let that dry and came back with a sander just so I could clean up and even out my cuts from the chainsaw even more. And then I sanded everything, the outside of the dresser, the inside of what I could, the inside of the drawers. I sanded this piece for hours and hours trying to get the surface smooth enough to get it ready for primer and paint. After sanding, I always wipe the dust away with a damp lint-free cloth because I don't want to have any dust particles in my paint finish. For primer today, I'm going to use Spray Clear Shellac. Now, why am I using shellac as my primer? Because this is an old antique piece and the old stains and wood tannins bleed so bad on these pieces. So I do 2 coats of that clear shellac. Clear shellac, I think, is the strongest and most protective primer to use when you have a piece that is a really bad bleeder. Next would be the white shellac, and then with the least amount of blockage would be water-based primers. So on these antique pieces, you're going to typically see me use some kind of shellac to block in those wood tannins. When you spray stuff in a non-filtered environment, it always collects pieces of dust in the air and then settles on top of your piece. You'll have little spray bumpies. So I use a 400 grit sanding sponge to lightly go off over the surface, and that's just to knock those bumpies down so it's nice and smooth. I'm not actually removing any of the shellac here. And then of course, anytime after sanding, always wipe away the dust so you have a nice clean surface to work with. Okay, last step before we get to the fun part of painting and creating on this piece. This oldie but beauty has some gaps just from, being moved around over all the years. And I want to fill in those gaps so it has a newer and fresher feel and it just looks better. So I use this paintable caulk to fill in any large gapped areas. I put a bead of the caulk in the crevice first. And then I come back with a gloved finger and wipe the excess, and then go over it one more time with a damp paper towel to wipe away any remaining excess. And then I let that dry before I start to paint. For my paint choice today, I'm taking it back to the beginning when I first started flipping furniture 11 years ago, and I am using some Annie Sloan chalk paint. Annie Sloan was kind enough to send me some of her products to use and try out, and I just knew that this paint was going to be perfect and the waxes are going to be perfect to finish and create this look that I want. This is the color Paris Gray, and I'm using this as a base coat, and I apply this over the entire dresser and drawer fronts. I have an Annie Sloan paintbrush, and I love that you don't really have to go any specific direction. You can see I'm going all over, and I'm just getting the paint on there. I'm going to end up creating a textured look, so I don't have to have nice, smooth brush strokes. I just kind of go over all over with this and just get the paint on there. I do let that first coat of paint dry and come back with a second coat of the Paris Gray. Now I've had this redesigned with pre-med decoupage paper. It's called Rainy Afternoon for quite a while, and I've been waiting for the perfect piece to use it on, and this dresser is it. I'm so excited. I've been so excited to use this decoupage paper. So to apply my decoupage paper, I use a coat of clear coat, and I put a layer of that on there and then put the decoupage paper into place. Use a very sharp razor blade to cut in between the drawers so the drawers are still functional, and then just work my way down the entire decoupage paper. Now, once I get the paper into place and my cut made, I do go back over the top of the decoupage paper with another coat of that clear coat, so the decoupage paper is sealed in and protected and stuck to the dresser. Now I have the paper applied in the middle of the dresser, and to make that seam not seem so bold between yes, this is paper and then yes, this is the dresser, I want to carry out some of the theme of the paper onto the dresser. So I have this stencil of some French letter, and I use Dixie Belle mud and fill that in just a couple spots here and there, just to make it seem like the paper doesn't just abruptly stop, that it spreads throughout the whole front of the dresser. On the paper pattern, there's also this kind of alligator skin looking design. So I have some heavy duty spackle, and the only thing I had in my house that kind of remotely resembled that was one of my colanders. So I'm using that as a guide to put some of this on here and there. And then I let the Dixie Belle mud and the spackle dry. I can't believe I used my colander, but sometimes you've got to use what you have on hand. All right, now for the fun part, we get to really create here. I have all these colors of Annie Sloan chalk paint, and I'm going to use them to kind of create and carry out the look of the decoupage paper to the rest of the dresser. So I start with a wet base coat, and my base coat is that Paris Gray. I want to add some texture here to make the surface uneven, and I'm using a stipple motion. So I have just a little bit of paint on the end of my brush, and I just dab, 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 or stipple that Paris Gray on. And I make sure to work in sections because I want that Paris Gray to stay kind of damp as I work. While that Paris Gray is still damp, I come back in with the color Emil. This is a purple color, which is heavily throughout that decoupage paper. And then I'd use the same method using that stipple dab, and then I come back while it's all still wet with that color Provence and add some turquoise around the edges. Pulling and using these light colors in the decoupage paper, using a little amount of paint on my brush and that stipple dab motion makes me able to create this blended watercolor look that absolutely looks fantastic. You have to wait to see the finished product. On the very corners and the legs, I did stipple in a little bit of that color Florence. I only did one coat of this blended paint look, let it dry, and then came back with that 400 grit sandpaper or sanding sponge and lightly went over the surface. I wipe the sanding dust away, and then the next step is to wax and protect it. I'm using Annie Sloan's clear wax. Waxes are so easy to use. I just get some of the wax on the brush, and you can see I'm not going any certain direction, and you just kind of work the wax into the paint. The paint colors change a little bit. They come more vibrant when you add the wax, so it's easy for you to tell where you've had the wax and where you have not gotten it. I do work in sections here because I put on a coat of the clear, wipe away the excess, and then I come back in with some dark wax and I work all over. And I make sure I go over the decoupage paper as well. So I create a fluid worn work with this dark wax. And I just use that same method going over the entire piece. I add a coat of the clear wax, come back with a microfiber cloth, wipe the excess clear away, use the dark wax to work it in, and then I let that dry. Now, we still have the inside of this drawer that we need to take care of because the top drawer is absolutely disgusting. If cleaning and sanding does not take care of drawer stains, my favorite way just to cover them up is to use some peel and stick wallpaper. I found this design on Amazon and I thought it went beautifully with the piece of furniture. I cut a piece of the wallpaper down to size, leaving a little bit of room for error, and stick it down into the bottom of the drawer, come back with a razor blade to trim up the edges and just remove that. And voila, no more nasty stains. The last step is to condition and protect the wood on the drawers with some citrus wax. I do that like I did with the Annie Sloan wax. I just use the brush to apply it, let it set, come back, wipe the excess wax away, and then this piece is done. Here's a reminder of what this very damaged dresser looked like at the beginning. It is worn and torn, but still has good bones. And then this is what it looks like now. Okay, I have to admit that I absolutely love this piece. The paper and paint all came together and the waxes to create this beautiful look, and it's in now my top 10 favorite pieces I have ever done. So blending paint colors isn't my strong suit, but this is stipple blend look is a nice, easy alternative that looks fantastic. I hope you enjoyed this flip. That is all I have for you today. Until next time.